So I'm going to throw a lot of different things, what I call concepts. And concepts to me are something that I have worked with and I have worked and try to promote and develop a little bit. And what I want you guys to do is take that concept and just take it home and say, he did this. Now I want you to mold your direction. Don't take what I say as golden, because there's another guy right behind me telling you exactly different. Each angler, which makes them great, does their own thing. So to make yourself great, take whatever angler you meet, take a little bit of everybody. That's what I do every time somebody comes to my boat. I learn a little bit about everybody. You know, I was asked, and I talked to Dave, and Dave says, hey, we're going to do those. What did you talk about the Delta? I said, done deal, because the Delta's right here. He has a lot of product for the California Delta, and it is rated probably the #1 in the country of fisheries. You know, clients and me are catching anywhere from 25, 30 fish to 60 fish a day per angler. The fishing right now is real good, but because of the hot summer days, you're catching a lot of fish about this big. You know, you're catching that ½ pound to 2 pounds, and then you'll catch those good ones every once in a while. Let me tell you the best tide, and I'm going to illustrate this. It's real simple. What's your name? Anthony. You and I are going out fishing, right? So Anthony's in my boat. Anthony, you know how to use a fishing rod? Yeah. Good. All right, so Anthony, we're sitting here fishing, right? And here's Mr. Bass. And Anthony says, dude, that's a good-looking tree in the water, and I want to fish that tree. I said, okay, Anthony, we're going to go fish that tree. It's high tide right now. We're going to go fish that tree. So what we do is, Anthony comes up and he goes, can I have the first cast? I said, Anthony, the boat's all yours, man. Cast over there. So he takes this nice, beautiful buzzbait, persuader buzzbait, and he throws it out there and goes, pop, 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 pop. Goosh, this 3-pounder eats it. And Anthony goes, I got him. So bring him in, takes the fish. I take a picture of Anthony. I said, let him go. He goes, man, this is a great spot. Can we come back here? I said, yeah, we're going to come back here, Anthony. So Anthony and I, we're going to come back here. So we're going to come back here. Oh, about 3-4 hours later, what happened to Mr. Bass? Gone. Because if he was still there, he'd be flopping on the bank. So he moved. So here's the concept. I like yours. I like your answer. Here's what rounds out everybody. What's the best tide to fish that tree right there? High tide. There you go. That's the mistake 99.9% of the anglers right now worry about, is what tide. I don't worry about what tide. I never worry about what tide. I get in the water. I put my boat in. My client says, what's the tide today? I don't care. When I put the boat in the water, I look at the tide. It tells me which way I'm wanting to go. So now, we're going to learn the tides, because the tides are so important. Because as I became a trout fisherman, when I started off fishing with my grandfather and my dad, taught me one thing: face fish. The fish face into the current, so they're always looking for the food to coming at them. That's what a bass does. So if the current's coming at them like this, and you've got a tules, there's a tule clump. That bass is going to be in several different ambush spots. That bass is going to be here. That bass is going to be here. And that's where he's going to be. Here's what the water does. As the water comes down the bank, it diverts out, rolls around, and comes back in. So he doesn't have to work as hard when he's sitting here. He doesn't have to work as hard as when he's sitting here. So if this was a real short clump, this size, not talking little big old walls of tules, talking about short clump, you got 2 zones. The front part of that zone is dead. The biggest fish will not be on that zone. I know a lot of guys go, yeah, I caught a bunch of fish there. Where was the better fish? Well, I caught the first fish right at the point. That's where he should have been. The rest of the fish are going to be the ones that are taking second fiddle to the most aggressive fish. The most aggressive fish is the big fat fish, because they're not fat for a reason. They eat. Okay? So when you're fishing areas, you want to know which way the tide is, because you want to fish to line yourself up each cast and make sure that you hit those spots each time, not just flailing at the bank. People that I call chuck and winders is the guy that I like to fish against in the competition, because they're the guys that throw against the bank and reel back in. Okay, now we're going to learn the tide. As the tide moves, this is SF, San Francisco. Let's go here, Tracy. All right. As the tide, let's say we launch Tracy. Okay, we got a low tide. We got a low tide. Okay? Now, In San Francisco, let's call it Antioch, or Pittsburgh, because that's about as far as we want to go, Antioch or Pittsburgh, what would the tide be if this is low? Can anybody answer that? Go ahead, I want to hear that kid in the back.
High.
High, how come? But it was a good answer. Come here.
That's where it started.
Because that's where it starts. All right? So we got a high tide. What's happening is the water's going to go out here. As it goes out, it's finally going to stop. It's going to what we call bottom out. Some of us call it skinny. When it bottoms out, it drops. As it turns, it's going to fill this into the delta before it fills this in. Here's my concept. If I'm going to fish a specific tide throughout the day, you people that do not have boats, it's easily done. You get in your car, you do just like a bass boat does. You go down to the farthest area you want to drive to and drive all the way back, and you can fish that tree that I illustrated earlier, that tree all day long. The same tree there, then you move up, the same tree there, another half minute, tree there. Does that make sense? Because what you're doing is, as this tide starts to rise, all this water starts to rise. Starts to rise. And by the time it rises and gets to the high tide, what's happening? That's getting low. It's reversing. So now, when I put the boat in the water, I say to myself, I'm at a low tide at Lads. I'm going to launch out of Lads. I'm at a low tide. So, what bite do I want to fish? Do I want to fish a top water bite that I'm fishing over top of the weeds, or do I want to fish a low tide where I can placement maybe like poppers around the weed line or flip the weeds? My client says, I really want to learn how to flip. Boom, I'm going to the left because I have moving water and I have the dropping tide going to my left. If I want to fish the top water bite because I want to fish over the weeds, I go to my right. Does that make sense? Because Lads is in the middle, between the two. So if I want to run out of Lads, I go down, come back, and go to Tracy, or I go down and I go towards Antioch, San Francisco direction. Concept? Does everybody understand that? Simplicity at its finest. Don't worry about the tide. Don't let the tide bother you so much that you're going, I've got guys that sit there and pull in the boat. Oh, shoot, that's a low tide. This is going to be a terrible day. No. Don't let that get to you. Then go the opposite direction. One place on the delta, you got 1,500 miles of waterway. You've got enough water out there to find a high and a low. Or you'll find the switch, which is always a good tide. Don't let the tide get to you. You'll beat the tide if you just let the tide work for you. If you have a designated spot, you will lose. Oh, I got this great spot. You pull up to it, and you go, oh, man, that's a bummer, man. I don't have enough water. Or I got too much water, I can't see the dang weed line. Well, that's your problem right there. I don't have one spot. I have 50. And one day I'll hit 50 spots to catch one fish, to catch those better limits. That's how these guys do it. Bobby Barrick does not go out there and fish one hole. He hits 20 to 50 spots. Sap, exact same thing. These guys understand the tide to the fit the letter, and they will work an area and they'll work back towards their home page. They know what they're doing with the tides. But if you learn the tides, you will catch those bass because that's easy fishing. Okay? Here's Mr. Bass. Okay? He's looking at you. He's smiling because he can feed on that tide at that spot. And as the tide starts to lower and that Mr. Bass says, I don't like that spot because I don't have enough water to feed in. I got to move. So Mr. Bass goes to this spot. And he sits there. Then, as that day progresses, he goes to this spot. And he sits. He goes to different areas throughout his day. People here, everybody here is going, oh yeah, I think so. It's real simple. If that tide's real high up and you're buzz banking that down at Woodward Cut and you're going down a bank and you're buzzing it, boy, I'm having a good day in the morning, buzzing it, or in the afternoon, buzz baiting and having a good old time, and that water drops. Now you got another little weed patches. You're going, how do I fish this stuff? Where's the bass? Bass positioned themselves differently than you're throwing a bait. So what you got to do is you got to change up. Now, what I do on a high tide, I do lots of different things. I cover water because I cannot see. Even with Solar bad sunglasses. One of the best sunglasses on the market right now. No, I just had to throw that in. Yeah, exactly. You like that? Even with a good pair of glasses, you cannot see what I call umbrellas. Let me show you an umbrella. And I'm going to continue with that same thought what you're talking about. The umbrellas are weeds that grow up in the delta. On a high tide, they're like this. And as the tide starts to lower, they do this. Here's Mr. Bass. Mr. Bass loves those spots. As the sun comes up, he can get right up underneath that umbrella. As those weeds come up, and as the tide starts to go out, they lay over. You see them all the time. I call them umbrellas. And they lay up underneath those umbrellas, and they just ambush bait all the time. You can throw your frogs on top of them. You can throw any type of twitch worms on top of them. Any style of bait that you can walk across there without getting snagged up is a good thing for these fish right here. Now, when you're fishing the top water, these are straight up and down. Okay? So what you got to do is position yourself to fish areas where the sunlight, see that bite right here in the daytime is not a problem, in the morning, early morning is not a problem you have that high tide, right? It's that afternoon, because what happens is the fish don't have eyelids, so they have to drop out of sunlight. They got to get away from it. So you have to find the next location. Here's the next location. Here's your rock bank. We're just going to get a levee, okay? And we have your weeds. All the way down the bank. Now you got some tules that are throughout these weeds. And you got some tules here as we go down the bank. Okay? Now, as a high tide, you can barely see these you can barely see these weeds. You can see every once in a while you see some of them, right? And as you see some of them, you're going to say, I wish I knew where the outside weed line was, because that's where one of those fishes will go. They'll go onto the outside weed line. Because what happens is, let's take this and go on a side angle. Okay? As that bank goes down like this, goes here, the Corps of Engineers have designed the structure of the bank with rocks to hold the walls. But California has so much money that they only put the rocks out approximately 15 feet at the straight out, approximately. So at your low, 15 feet out is rocks, and then it stops. Okay, there is no rocks down here because we're not supporting China. We're not worried about China getting our water down below. There is no rocks in the middle of the delta unless it was dropped there or left there. They don't rock the levees like this. They just rock the walls, the side walls. And because the way they rocked does this, so they have support. Yep, it goes right in the water, goes out about 15 feet. But you know how far 15 feet is? You need a gentleman with a red hat? That's not hard at all. Especially when you have a bucket that holds 1.5 yards and it's picking up rocks and doing like that, and you see it boosh, boosh as it's going out and then dumping it. And that rock just tumbles in and finally gets it packed solid enough. So it goes out about 15 feet. Now, as it goes out, the further it goes out, the more sporadic the rocks are. So you might have one rock 15 feet, and you'll have most of them at 10 feet, but it will go out. I found a lot of little rock piles out here. Now, those bass, now you're starting to see a concept here. I love the word concept, gentlemen and lady. Now, here's those weeds. Now, as bass fishing, we all know one thing. We love to fish behind this weed line here on that tide. Well, that's a good alleyway. Boy, that's that little spot right across down here. Well, that's candy right there. But on the high tide, when the tide starts getting real high, you can't see that as well sometimes. Here's where the fish will go in a sunny part of the day. They'll go right here. This is where they'll go. Outside the weed line. Now, these weed lines are not perfectly straight. They look like this. See that right there? Now, because you can't see it, that's where it gets difficult. You can't see these in and outs. Now remember, when I talked to you guys earlier, I told you where those fish position themselves when they're around a tule. There's a tule patch here. They'll be on the point of this and a point of that. Exact same thing as these points here. You just can't see those points. Now you're going to say, well, how do I fish them then? Real simple. Couple different baits. This is where you got to get real. You got to get clever. We move into baits. Okay. These are the three colors I throw on the delta. There is no other colors in the Delta. Now you can modify it, shads, chromes, little blueback, little silverback, but shad is a food that the bass eat. No matter what color shad it is, it's shad, okay? Bluegill, I don't care if you do chartreuse and blue, I don't care if you do blue and blue, most definitely got to have the chartreuse in it. But it's a bluegill. They eat a lot of bluegill, okay? And the ever-loving crawdad, whether it's brown, orange, or we get the teal up there in the potato slough area, the ones we eat. You've eaten those ones from the crawdad area, the festival over there in Ione. Okay? Those crawdads are teal and they're olive color with a big giant clippers. And so that's why the teal color, what we call a greenback crawdad, works real well in that area. If you know your areas, you can start penetrating the areas with the right color crawdad patterns. A lot of guys, this is the color bait they throw everywhere.
That's probably I've had more fish on that bait on the Delta than anything else.
Mostly aqua green water,
Yeah.
that beautiful aqua green, because it shows up the best in aqua green water. This color shows up the best in aqua green. Okay, but if I take you to potato slough, take a little green one, an olive color one, in the wintertime, you'll beat them like a drum. You'll beat them like a redheaded stepchild. Anybody that's got redhead? Good. Okay. Those are your three colors. Now you can branch off. If you look at the wall, every one of these colors he's got on the wall, they resemble of that combinations. You don't have to, well, I use a pink plebe-do, and doesn't need to do that. You don't need to do that. Here's the other thing. I pick a crankbait, two crankbaits. One that's going to go approximately 9 to 10 feet or less, and the other one's going to be 4 foot and less. Those are the two size crankbaits I use. There is no other crankbaits, because remember, in the Delta, the fish consistently are not going to be any more deeper than that, because there's nothing in there that structures it's going to be that deep. Although there are areas that are. So it's a golden rule that you do not have to throw a 14-foot crankbait going out there 20 foot plus down there trying to go Delta. All you're going to do is get a bunch of dead bodies, and we don't bring those things up. All right? So when you're fishing these, what I like to do is I call it ticking the tops of the weeds, using a light action style rod. Now we start getting into the rods. 7 foot, when you're talking crankbaits, I like a light tip. And the reason why I like a light tip is because when I'm running this crankbait into that water, and as I'm working it down, it's just ticking the tops of the weeds. Now I could go into start telling you about botany and what the weeds grow into, but that's another whole day, guys. When I'll bring a jar of different weeds and tell you how they grow, where they grow, that's another day. So what you want to do is you want to be able to tick the tops of the weeds. I've been with a lot of anglers. First thing you want to do is have a rod that allows you to feel those weeds. If it's too stiff, you'll just tear the tops of the weeds and you'll never feel them. So this is what you do when you throw the bait out, and as you're reeling the bait down, ticking the tops of the weeds. When I tick the weeds, I stop instantly, allowing that bait to float up. What it does is as it's going down and it hits the weeds, it's the bill that hits the weeds first. Okay? And as you pull through them, what happens is that first hook wants to wrap around. So what I do, instead of pulling through them, I reel down, I hit the weeds, I stop, allowing that bait to start floating back up. As it floats back up, it pulls the weed up with it. Because remember, as you were driving it down, it pulled the weed down. So I'm letting it come up. As it's coming up, I do what I call kicking it. I kick every bait, everything that I fish with, I kick it. I go choop choop, ripping that bait through those weeds, and then I start retrieving again. What I'm doing is I'm finding the tallest weed under the surface on that edge, because the tallest weed tells me it's the point. It's the point. So I'll see a weed, and I'll throw it out alongside that weed, and I'll start reeling down. Oh, I feel weeds. Pause. Tear, tear. Continue to retrieve. And as I continue to retrieve, I don't feel anything else. Good. I just found a point. That point right there is the first part of weed, and I didn't even see it. So then I'll move in a little more with the cast. Choom. I'll reel down. Tear, tear. No more weeds. Oh, I found some weed. Oh, there's another one. Tear, tear. Now I found the inside edge. I know that spot, and I'm just going down the bank. By making a long cast parallel in it, just like what you're standing, and doing this, I'm allowing myself to find that edge of the weed line, and that's where Mr. Bass is. Because he sure is not up on top, because, remember, he's got no sunlight, no shade. He's got to go down. He's got to go at least 3 feet, because that sunlight penetration, I can see the bait in 3 feet. That fish will come out at 6 easily and eat your bait at 3. You know, you'll get those explosions. The other thing is, these Thule points, cranking these and these spots right here where the shade's allowing the fish to be. They might not be there because in the morning when you got a high tide, because in the morning those fish are roaming up and down and eating every bait they possibly can. But as the day progresses and the tide starts getting higher, this might not be his best ambush spot. He might move out of that area. He might move from this big weed line where he was, then he moves right over here behind the stuff where he can have the shade in those little pockets. Yes, sir.
Hey, Randy, when you were saying that you run the tides, I mean, and you leave an area when it drops down, why would you do that? Because, I mean, aren't you wasting a lot of times running from point A to point B? You could just find deep parts of that area you're fishing, and if there's structure in those deep parts, you'll find those fish because they'll move away from where they were, that stump, to a stump that's deeper, like in, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Why wouldn't you just do that? Find your prime areas that's got where it's got the deep pockets, and then when the low tide comes in, you know, okay, now that fish probably moved down here and then hit the deep parts in that area, rather than to go from way here to way over there.
I agree with you 100%. Let's revert back to what I said earlier. If you're trying to catch as many fish as a day can go, and you've got a specific tide that you're catching a fish, that's what the question was. I'm trying to work that tide to your advantage. If you want to stay in an area and learn that area and be better at that area, most definitely do what you suggested. Most definitely. But if I'm fishing out there and I have a bite going on that's really good at a specific tide, I'm not going to stick around when that tide's gone because I can't fish it. So I'll maneuver the boat, continuing to fish that specific style of bite with me throughout the day to have what I've considered a better bag of fish. If I want to learn where those fish go of that area where you're talking about, I definitely would want to stay there and find his secondary and his third-dairy spots of where that fish goes. Does that answer your question? Because I agree with you, if I wanted to learn that area. But if I'm out there...
You won't do that in a tournament? Say if you got a...
No, we'll not do that in tournament.
Still run the tides?
You bet.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
Every day.
That would always be your...
You bet. Every angler runs a tide in tournament fishing. You know why? Because they get on the right tide. They want to be at a specific spot when they know that fish is going to be there. That's how these guys win. That's how I've won. That's how Steve Sapp, one of the most predominant bass fishing on the Delta there is. He has to be at a specific spot at a specific tide, and then you hear about it. Yeah, I didn't have a fish till 10 o'clock, and then I loaded the boat with 27 pounds for 5. Because he knew that he was just going to beat the brush, do whatever he could, but his fish would not turn on in a specific time zone. When those fish positioned themselves that he could catch them. Now you, as an angler, you went there. I bet you, working in different angles, could catch his fish at a different tide. Because you would want to learn that, which is probably the way I would like to work on it. I would want to learn, if I had to be at this spot at a specific time, like if we went out fishing tomorrow and we looked at our tide tables and we put boat in the water and we go, what do you want to do? Well, I want to learn how to fish a specific area. The first thing I'm going to do is say, okay, let's start out, because this time of year I want to throw a topwater bait, then I want to work with a spinner bait, then I want to work with a crankbait, and then I want to work with a flipping stick. I want to show you everything that Delta can provide for you. So to do that, I'm going to go to an area where I can work that style of baits throughout the day. Now, if you say I want to learn an area, then we're going to develop to where that fish will be here at one part of the tide, here on another part of the tide. When it gets too low, we're going to have to go find that off-water structure. We have to do that if we're going to stick in one area to learn it real well. And that's how you develop an area where you can find those fish, because a lot of times these fish will sit here and won't feed because there's not enough where it's not positioned properly for him, and that time zone was an hour and a half ago. That's when that fish feeds that day, then he moved. So if I want to learn an area, most definitely I do what you're saying. But if I want to fish a specific tide on a specific spot, got to move. Got to keep the boat moving. Remember, fish school, the prey school. So if you got a bird that falls in the water and it starts flailing, a bass automatically understands that that's food. Now you see a mama duck swimming across the water, and you see a lot of baby ducks following mama. They all fall in line. But one gets out of line, you got one less baby duck. She's done. Okay? Happens all the time with all of Mother Nature. Mother Nature's designed something real simple. Only the strongest survive. If only the strongest survives, then by you banging the rocks, bumping the stumps, kicking the tops of the weeds, racking, hitting, bumping any target you can, you will catch a fish. How many people here have caught a fish or seen the fish as you bring it out of the water, the fish comes up and sees it and takes off or hits it? How many people? We all. I mean, if you're an angler, you've seen it. And the reason why is it's real simple. Let me show you real quick. As that bait is going through the water with its design, see what I got going here? I got what we call a pattern. All right? I never, ever, ever reel anything with a pattern. Even when I'm czar spooking it. Click, 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 click. No. It's click, 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 stop. Click, 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 stop. Click, 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 click. Making it look like it's injured. Any bait. Because as you got a pattern, the fish is like this. The bass is like, I'll swim up behind it. I'll swim up behind it. All of a sudden, pretty soon, that thing starts to do this. Now it's starting to come up because it reached its peak. Now it's coming towards you. And once it did that, it changed its trajectory. Once it changed its trajectory, the bass goes, holy smokes, I'm losing control of it. I want to eat it. So he lunges at it. That's why that happens. It's that last action when you pull the bait out of the water with a flipping rod, when you throw a worm in the water, and you go, there's nothing there. Whoosh! Holy smokes, you came out after it. Because what you did was you threw it in there. Nothing in that hole. Nothing in that hole. Nothing in that hole. Bank's dead. Then the guy down below you goes, get the net, I got another one. You're going, you dirty, dirty guy here. What happens is, without changing the trajectory, you're not going to catch as many fish of those fish that you're going to work on a lateral line. Mother Nature has taught those fish to grab a hold, eat the prey that's injured. So when I'm throwing a crankbait out, for instance, like we talked about, I'm kicking the weeds, I stop, and then I start again. I'll get nailed just about every time I start up again. If I reel and bump a rock, boom, I stop, let that bait back up, then continue to retrieve, boom, he eats the bait. I catch a lot of bigger fish by doing it that way. With a spinnerbait, same thing I do with the spinnerbait. As a spinnerbait falls, I want a spinnerbait back now. As the spinnerbait falls, okay, as it's going through the water, as the blades are turning and they're rotating through the water, you're going to go and throw it out and you're going to reel it back in. You are considered a chuck and winder in my book because all you're doing is throwing it from point A and bringing it back to point B. If you work this bait at the contour of the bottom, as we know the delta, let's use this illustration here as the bottom. Here's your bank and it's going down and you've got several different weed patches and weeds. You want to throw the bait, and here's your boat. You want to throw the bait behind that, work it down, and then bring it back on up and over, tickle the tops and let it fall down again, covering all these fish that are sitting here, or the ones that are sitting right on the banks.
Is that the opposite if you're on the bank? Cast it out.
Exactly. Exactly.
Work it that way.
And because you asked that, I can't give you that one.
So,
I'm going to give you this one.
thank you.
And here is a persuader box for you. Okay? Now, because you asked that, I like that. What's happening is you bank fishermen, here is the number one problem I see boat fishermen and bank fishermen do. As you're going down the bank, here's your bank, and here's your weed line. Okay, here's your toolies, whatever. Okay? Now, the boat fisherman, here's your boat. Now, that's $40,000 boat's casting at you, and you're sitting on the bank, and here you are. And this is your son?
No, my grandson.
Oh, grandson. Okay, he's this big.
Yeah.
Okay? All right, you guys are fishing it. You're casting this way, and they're casting that way. There's no difference. Here's what you're going to do. Never, ever, ever cast a motion bait on the delta this way. You guys walking the bank, never, ever, ever cast it this way. Because, I said earlier, your area of ambush is only going to be 15 feet out from where the rocks are. So, here's your concept. Here's your areas. The angles are so important on the delta. throw it across like this. Here's your angles now. You double your size if you throw on your angles. When you're walking down the bank, never toss out in front of you. Always throw down along the bank. Parallel as possible. Throw it out away from the weeds, that first initial weeds, out there in front, bringing it like it's coming through the weeds, and then back on this side. You will catch more fish by walking the bank and throw it off these angles. If you're bank fisherman, you throw it like this. So you're casting over top of the outside weed line and bring it back through, because the fish will hear it coming. If you throw it right in the side here, you'll spook 90% of those fish. You'll hit them right on top of the head. The ones that are in the alley, what I call the alleyway. Good question. I like that.